This is TORAH 411. We're going to talk today about Luke 10:18, which is about Satan falling like lightning. We're going to let James BRAYSHAW, author of 4 books about No Satan, discuss what does it mean that Jesus, Yeshua, said that he saw Satan fall like lightning. I know that it's about Capernaum and the fall of the false teachers and false religious beliefs in Capernaum falling, and not about Satan. But we're going to have James BRAYSHAW explain it more in depth. What is Christ's message here in Luke 10:18?
If I were to encapsulate the message that's being spoken here by Christ, he knew that when they went out and taught truth, which means to go in his name, that false teachers would change their thinking. False doctrines would fall in the face of true doctrine, and it was no surprise that the adversary, which is what the word Satanas means in this passage, fell like lightning. And Christ is never afraid to use a very strong metaphor to just express a dramatic change of position for a person or perhaps a kingdom. So let's take a look at where this all starts, and we might get a better picture of what he meant. If we look at what he said about Capernaum at the very start of this passage, "And you, Capernaum, which art exalted to heaven, shall be thrust down to hell." Why is he saying Capernaum is in heaven? It's a city in his area. And why is he saying it's going to be thrust down to hell? Can a city be thrust into hell? Or is he making a metaphorical reference, which was a very popular rabbinic style of teaching in his day? What does he tell the disciples he's about to send out just before he sends them? He says in verse 16, "He that hears you hears me, and he that despises you despises me." So in Christ's preamble to this very often proof-texted passage, we find he's instructing his disciples that they're going to encounter people who will either like what they have to say or despise what they have to say. What is it the traveling disciples meant when they returned and said, "Hey, even the devils were subject to us in your name"? Well, they used the word demonian. If we look at the Greek, it's very likely they were speaking Aramaic, but we're going to deal with the Greek, which is what the New Testament is built off of. And that word demonium didn't mean to them what it means to us today in Christendom. In fact, to them it simply meant an opposer, or that which is against them. And even the demonian, the opposing views, the opposing teachers, the opposing religious factions, were subject to the truth. Nobody could refute the powerful truths they were sharing in the name of their Messiah. It can hardly be stated enough that he set them up by telling the men would despise them. They come back and say even the opposers, the demonian, believed us. And then he says, "Hey, I saw the adversary fall like lightning." And speaking of that fall, when was it? Was it that day that he saw Satan fall from heaven? If this is in fact about a literal cosmic Satan that fell from heaven, why do we hear about it in Isaiah 14? Why do we hear about it in the book of Job? Why do we hear about it in Ezekiel? And why do we hear about it here in Luke chapter 10? Was there several times when Satan fell from heaven? Or did Christ see them all? Or was he referring to one specific time? The inconsistencies are far too great, and we can't ignore that. I'm not going to go into it today, but it needs to be considered when you're looking at what was really meant by his statement in this passage. After they return, he tells them he wasn't surprised and that he had given them power to tread on serpents and scorpions. Do we think for 1 minute that Christ knew what the scriptures spoke about and what a serpent and scorpion was biblically? Yes. Well, we actually find him and his disciple John calling the scribes and Pharisees a brood of vipers, which is in essence a serpent. And he would have known a very telling passage in Ezekiel chapter 2, which says this, "He said unto me, Son of man, I send you to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation that has rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me. Man, don't be afraid of them, neither be afraid of their words. Though briars and thorns are with you, and you do well among scorpions, be not afraid of their words." A scorpion was someone who had words that were against the words of God and were considered to be rebellious according to Ezekiel. So we put together a lot of pieces to clear things up, but people will want to know, what does he mean that the spirits were subject to them? Well, you've got me. I can't neglect that and pretend that this verse is about human beings until we deal with what the spirit is. We have to look at the word pneuma and find out what it means when it's placed in the context of this entire passage. A passage that is speaking about men and women going out, sharing truth, coming back and being quite jubilant that the false teachers and false leaders of the diaspora actually believed their truths, their teachings. They were rejoicing greatly. But Christ said, hey, don't rejoice that the spirits are subject to you. Rejoice that your names are in heaven. So what does the word spirit mean? The word is pneuma, and it can be seen in context to mean the rational spirit, the power by which the human being feels, thinks, and decides. So when they changed their rationale, they became subject to the truth of the disciples. But there was no surprise for the Christ when the disciples came back and said, hey, even those who oppose your doctrine, even those scorpions and serpents who are out there teaching errors, even they were subject to us. Christ knew they would be subject to his truth, his teaching. He knew without a shadow of doubt before they left that he would see the adversary dramatically change its position, which is why he said, I saw a Satan fall like lightning from heaven. There's no doubt that Christ meant something far different than what you and I have been taught in Christendom today. Really, when push comes to shove, there are no verses in the entire Bible that affirm there's a supernatural Satan as a literal cosmic entity waiting to drag souls to hell and torture us for an eternity. That's got nothing to do with the justice of God, nor does it have anything to do with biblical instruction. It's simply a man-fabricated idea in order to explain evil because it was so hard to understand what evil was.
All right. Thanks, James. And, evil, what came from the heart of man, it never came from Satan, a supernatural being. So this is Torah 411. And thanks for